This is a new unit. I mean, technically, San Augustine should be part of the ancient world. In fact, he should probably be the last lecture for the ancient world. However, I'm including him as the first lecture in the medieval period, even though he predates the medieval period by about 300 or 400 years. Because in many ways, what Augustine is trying to do in his work is setting the tone for what you see throughout the rest of the medieval philosophy and theology of Western Europe in particular. So, I'm setting Augustine up here as kind of, in many ways, setting the tone and being the beginning of what becomes medieval theology. A little bit of historical context because it's quite complicated. In fact, much more complicated than I have here. But just to give you an idea. Um, after we left off with Jesus, the apostles like Peter take over and they begin to kind of try to convert people. At first, they try to convert. Well, at first they try to convert Gentiles, which are non-Jewish people, into the Jewish religion. Um, but eventually, too many conflicts with the Jewish religion occur, um, and so Peter and the rest of the apostles and their newly converted um, followers end up kind of starting their own path and becoming what we now call Christianity. Right? And you have to remember these are different villages and cities in various different territories found throughout the Roman Empire. So some of the apostles wind up converting people in like Ethiopia and Egypt, others in Rome and Greece, others in Judea, um, or other parts of the Middle East, and they all exist under the Roman Empire, but they're kind of very distant from each other with not a whole lot of communication between each other. And so as what we now call Christianity begins to take root throughout these different communities, begins to kind of evolve into, you know, very different, disagreeing ideologies, especially when it comes to like the religious questions, um, that are all still somehow under one big umbrella as following of Christ. Um, then, um, under the Roman Empire, it becomes illegal to practice Christianity, um, primarily under Nero, the emperor. Um, there's a lot of complicated reasons why that happens, but the basic gist of it is two key points. One is that the Christians refuse to accept the Roman emperor as a god in human flesh, especially because that's exactly what they are claiming about Jesus of Nazareth. Um, and so the Romans have no problem with them worshiping Jesus. They have a problem with them not worshiping the Roman emperor. The second point is that the fact is the Romans don't really trust these Christians, um, because they're converting so many, um, usually in secret, usually at night, um, usually amongst the people that they're trying to keep under control. And so they see them as a bit of a threat. And so this kind of helps push the idea that maybe they should, you know, that's one religion they should criminalize. Um, Nero, in particular, had personal reasons. He needed an enemy that he could point to and kind of galvanize all the Romans against. This way, he was hoping it would um, reduce some of his own conflicts amongst, other royals and amongst, the senators, and some of the aristocratic elite in Roman culture. So he had a bunch of political conflicts happening, and he was trying to get the people behind him against someone by finding a common enemy. And so he kind of created this smear campaign against the Christians, often blaming them for very violent acts that had nothing to do with them. Um, so those are three things that kind of helped create this climate that led to the Christians being considered illegal within the Roman Empire. And if you got arrested, you'd be put on trial, and then you'd either be executed or tortured or put into the Colosseum to fight against gladiators or to be eaten by wild dogs or lions. So there was a lot of very real life and death risks associated with becoming a Christian. And this lasted from around the 60s, right? Like around 64, 65 in the Common Era, all the way up until the early 300s. And so this brings us to the historical context that we see here on the page. Constantine was the Roman emperor who decriminalized the Christian religion in the early 300s. Um, you know, there's a couple of reasons why he did it. One was his wife was a Christian, and then two, he had a vision of the Virgin Mary that kind of led him to his final success in the Civil War, that led to his beating his opponents for the throne of Rome, and led to him becoming an emperor. And so, in as a how should I say this, as a quid pro quo for kind of getting some help from the Virgin Mary according to the tradition, and in order to not have to arrest his own wife, he makes Christianity legal. Then he was under the guidance of Lactantius. Lactantius was the tutor of Constantine's sons, and he was a Christian himself, Lactantius. Um, he convened what was called the Council of Nicaea in 325, and basically they got all of the church leaders from the different villages and cities around the Roman Empire, and they brought them to Nicaea, where they had a council and they met and they ironed out kind of um, their disagreements. They basically started having a discussion about, you know, Mary, whether Mary was a virgin or not, and what it meant. Jesus, was he all God? Was he all man? Did he have a body? Did he suffer? Did he feel pain? Did he know everything? Was he, you know, what did it mean to be the Son of God? What does it mean to be the Son of Man? Right? All these questions that people had different ideas about. They basically had debates, and then eventually they voted, and then the majority won, and then these are the things that they decided is officially what Christianity is about, right? This is what they believe, and this is also when they started deciding which books would be included in what was now going to be considered the Christian Bible. Not only in terms of the Gospels, because there were a lot of Gospels floating around. Besides the four that you know, which are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there was a lot of Gospels like the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Paul, the Gospel of Thomas, even the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, among many others. And this Council of Nicaea decided, that they were going to go with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for a number of reasons. One, they agreed with each other the most. Two, they agreed with what they had just voted on and decided. And three, they were the earliest ones, so they were closest historically to the actual lifetime of Jesus. Um, most of them within 35 to 50 years after Jesus. So those are kind of the things that were being decided in this Council of Nicaea. If any of you are, Catholic or other types of Christianity, you may remember like the Nicene Creed, right, which has a list of things that you believe, and so that's, based off of what they would decided in the Council of Nicaea. This was all under Constantine, and at the suggestion of Lactantius. Later, a successor of Constantine, Theodosius I, named um, Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, in an attempt to try to create like a utopian world state unified by a universal religion. Notice the Greek word for universal is katholikos, right? So when Theodosius I creates this, official religion of Christianity, he calls it the Roman universal church, or the Roman Catholic Church. That's where it gets its name from. And this was around the year 385. Um, and basically, this leads to the creation of the Byzantine Empire, right? Which is no longer like a pagan Roman Empire, but now like a Catholic Christian empire. So where does Augustine fit into all of this? Well, at the beginning, and Augustine's still there in the 300s during all of this, while all of this is happening. At the beginning, Augustine was an opponent of Roman Catholicism. He spent some time with the Gnostics, and then some time with the Manichaeans, which, or were different groups that wanted to accept Christianity, but like the Gnostics, for example, would argue that if Jesus was God and God was pure, then God, then Jesus could not have a human body, right? Because it wouldn't be pure; it'd be filled with all the poisons that we get filled with, which is why we go to the bathroom, right? We get rid of poisons that we ingest or that we absorb through urine and through defecation. And for the Gnostics, they didn't want to admit that God would do those things. So they said that Jesus looked like he had a body, but he was pure spirit. And obviously, the Catholic Church, in the Council of Nicaea, rejected that because without a human body, then Jesus didn't really suffer during the crucifixion, right? Um, and so um, these Gnostics and Manichaeans not only were rejected by Roman Catholicism, they were considered heresy, and this is where like the beginning of where you begin to see the Catholics kind of labeling certain people as or certain beliefs as heresy, and then begin to persecute them. Well, Augustine started off as one of those, right? He was a Gnostic for a while, then he became a Manichaean. He was kind of floating around, going through phases. He was extremely gifted, and then personal tragedy struck. The woman he was in love with, um, passed away and left him with a son. And Augustine was, changed by that, and so he converted, like his mother had always wanted for him, and converted to Roman Catholicism and actually joined the order and became a monk along with his son. He brought his infant son with him, and his son would later grow up to become a monk as well. Um, and once he joined the orders of the Roman Catholics. He became one of its most successful defenders, and then eventually, became a quote unquote father of the church, right? Um, Augustine was greatly influenced not only by the Gnostics and the Manichaeans. Obviously, he was influenced by Jesus because he's a follower of Christ, but he also was influenced heavily by Plato. And for those of you paying close attention, maybe you can spot some of these ideas of Plato's, um, in the ideas coming up. Now, this next part is called the problem of evil. This is not San Agustin. The problem of evil is actually an atheist argument. Right? Remember, atheists do not believe in God. And so the problem of evil is an argument that tries to show that God does not exist. And the argument follows the bullets that you see here. Step one in the argument. God is defined by believers as the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good creator of the universe. Right? And I think that anybody who's religious would have no problem admitting that. Second point, history and current events are full of natural disaster, disease, war, poverty, sexual violence, murder, and death. I think anybody paying attention would also not have a problem agreeing with this. Now, the point the problem evil is making is that if you're claiming that God is the creator of the universe, and God is responsible for that universe, then you look at the universe and the human part of the universe is filled with like death and destruction and slavery and murder and rape and etc. Then what does that say about that God that created it, right? And so therefore this leads to four possibilities, right? One, God as a creator of the universe is not all knowing and does not really understand what a mess he made. Most people who are religious will not accept this as an answer, and it doesn't make sense because if God was not all knowing, then he wouldn't be God, right? Okay, option two, God as a creator is not all powerful, and he cannot stop humanity from messing it all up. Again, not only would people not would people reject this, but the fact is that if humans are more powerful than than God, or cannot be stopped by God, then God wouldn't be powerful enough to create the universe in the first place, right? So option two doesn't really work either. Option three, God as a creator is not all good. He refuses to help or fix anything. Maybe he's even sadistic enough to enjoy the misery that he sees. Um, and again, there are certain contradictions in this idea because, for example, if God were evil or sadistic, then that God would not be capable of creating beauty and peace and love and transcendence and these other concepts like justice, right? So, good can only exist in the universe if God is good. So, notice options one, two, or three, they don't satisfy. Um, Either way, you wind up with either something that's not a God, or you wind up with, a contradiction where, God's not, God could not create the universe if God was one of these three things. So, since the universe is a mess, right, and you don't want to say that God's weak or ignorant or dumb or sadistic or evil, then the only option is the fourth one. The fourth option is that there is no God, right? There is no creator. That the reason the universe is a mess is because no one's watching it. No one created it. There's no divine providence. There's no plan. There's no one really keeping an eye on the classroom. Um, and so, according to the last bullet, right, according to the atheist, you must conclude that the most logical option is the last option, right? That no one is guiding the universe, and that's why the universe is a mess. Violence is the rule of nature because it's just a matter of cause and effect. Now, this is the problem of evil. This is something that atheists were using to try to convince people to become atheists and to give up on religion. St. Augustine um, argued against the problem of evil, right? So, what's coming up next? This is from the book called The Confessions, written by St. Augustine. Um, Notice that, like in the book The Confessions, um, St. Augustine describes his own personal spiritual journey to faith, right? And one of the things he's trying to do is argue against the problem of evil, argue against the atheists, in order to try to show that there has to be a God and that evil is not really the fault of God but something else, right? And so these bullets here are the response St. Augustine has against the problem of evil, right? First, Augustine points out that there are two kinds of evil: natural evil and human evil, right? Natural evil would include things like, disease, age, natural disasters, right, like hurricanes and fires, and poison and black widow spiders and things like that, right? That's natural evil. Human evil is what humans do. We wage war. We enslave each other. We commit sexual violence. We commit murder. We commit genocide. Those are human evils, right? And so notice St. Augustine is kind of splitting those and saying they're not quite the same thing, and let's look at each of them separately, right? And so what he does when he looks at natural evil, he says, natural evil is actually not a real thing. It does not have independent existence. What we call natural evil is really just a matter of human perception. And in particular, it comes from when humans perceive, when they see, hear, smell, taste, or touch, something that is absent in existence that disappoints our own egoism, our own selfishness, and our own ignorant expectations. All right? And so I gave some examples here to kind of show what he means. So natural evil, right? Age is considered a natural evil, getting old. And St. Augustine would point out that age is really just a lack of youth, right? And age, right? No, it's an absence of youth. But notice, age as an absence of youth is only in evil if you're egoistic enough to want to stay looking young for the rest of your life, right? Because anybody who, is humble enough to recognize there's nothing wrong with age, right? Aging is part of the natural process, and there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing evil in it, right? Actually, it's a badge that you made it this far when so many other people didn't make it this far. So notice, age isn't really like an evil; it's just a lack of youth, and people only care about that if they're vain and they care about their looks, right? Same thing with death, right? Death is not an evil; it's just a lack of life. It's an absence of life, and what Augustine would point out is, if you're religious and you really believe in Christ and God and the soul and the afterlife, then why is death a bad thing, right? Death should actually be considered a good thing because you finally get liberated from the petty problems of this world and you get to go move on to the next life or the afterlife, right? So, death is really only like and even if you're not religious, right? Even from an atheist perspective, the fact that death is the end, it's just a natural part of the process. It's a natural part of the process of life and the cycles of nature. And so the only reason death is a bad thing is because you're selfish enough to want to like exist forever, right? Even though you would be taking the spot of somebody else in the future, right? Because there's only so many resources, and the longer we live, that's less resources for somebody else in the next generation. Po- um, illness is a lack of wealth. I skipped over poverty because that's a typo. That belongs under human evil. But illness, right? Illness is a lack of health, and uh, you know, illness is part of a process of nature as well, right? Um, One of the things that Augustine would argue is that like it's only from our own limited, ignorant perspective of selfishness, right? Me. What happens to me? That we don't see the big picture. From the universe's perspective, from nature's perspective, disease is a way of weeding out overpopulation within a species, so that there's a balance created between species, right? One of the reasons why human beings are overpopulating the earth and wiping out every other species is because we got so good at medicine that we've extended human lifespans and cured certain diseases, and as a result, there's a disharmony and a lack of balance in nature and in the universe, right? And as a result of that, we're in the middle of what's called the Anthropocene, which is the period of natural history when humans have taken over and they're wiping out species left and right. Illness is a natural factor in balancing the equilibrium between different animal species, right? What's the point of Augustine here? The point is that natural evil is something that comes from human perspective. We want more. We always want more. Our desires are never satisfied. We want more life. We want more youth. We want more sex. We want more money. We want more power. We want more land. We want more resources, etc. We always want more, right? And when we don't get more because of nature, because we get old, because we get sick, because we die, we point a finger at nature. We call it evil, right? But what Augustine's pointing out, it's not actually evil. It's just nature, right? So this leaves only really the other form of evil, human evil, right? And what he points out in the next bullet is that, violence, exploitation, enslavement, corruption, sexual violence, etc., right? Human evil arises from choices that humans make out of fear, right? that that we're the ones who have free will, and we use that free will to choose to do things to each other out of fear, right? We raise an army, and we conquer our neighbors and kill their people because we want more land, because we're afraid that we don't have enough land with what we have now. We're afraid that we don't have enough resources, right? We take advantage of workers and put them to work and don't pay them enough to survive or take care of their families out of fear, because we don't think that the money that I have is enough money, right? It's never enough. I'm always afraid that I'm going to be without, right? And so these different things that we do to each other are a reflection of fear, which is a reflection of either a lack of knowledge or a lack of faith or a lack of both, right? And so, what's the point here? What's his argument against the problem of evil? Well, his counter argument, right? His objection to the problem of evil is that we're blaming God for what's our problem, right? Natural evil is a product of uh, you know, our perspective, which is corrupted. It's sick with desire and ambition and hunger, right? And what we call natural evil isn't actually evil, and human evil arises from that, right? We want more medicine, we want more food, we want more land, we want more water, etc. So this causes us to take advantage of each other. This causes us to kill each other. This causes us to enslave each other, right? Because so the point that Augustine's making is that evil isn't the product of God, and it doesn't prove that there is no God, right? Evil is a product of us, and we're just trying to kind of escape responsibility for it by laying it down at God's feet, or by trying to deny God, right? Either way, we're still kind of trying to get our way instead of bending the knee to do what's right. At least that's Augustine's point of view when it comes to the problem of evil. That was from the book The Confessions. St. Augustine wrote another book called The City of God. It's huge. Like, that thing is huge, even in a paperback version. In The City of God, Augustine argues that there are many cities of men, but there's only one city of God. Right? And these aren't just like cities in terms of a geographic location that you can go and visit. What he means is a state of mind, right? Most people live in the cities of men. Not only physically living in cities of men, they live with the city of men perspective in their minds, the way they understand the world and how they want to treat it. And very few people who are actually followers of Christ live in the city of God, which is a mindset more than anything else. And that's what we're going to look at here in the next chart. So, what's the mindset, right? In the cities of men, the mindset is that man is the measure of all things. Right? If that sounds familiar, it should be. That's basically Protagoras, the sophist. Right? Man is the measure of all things. Remember, he said that we couldn't prove if there was a God or not, so in the end we're by ourselves. So we got to figure it out for ourselves, and that means we decide what is true, and then we solve those problems on our own terms. That's exactly what Augustine means here, right? In the cities of men, people are like the sophist Protagoras. They believe they're on their own. They believe that they live in fear of a universe within which they think they're by themselves, and they can rely on nothing but their own fear, their own cunning, and their own violence to survive. Right? You see that in the next box down, right? Human philosophy, different ideologies that determine various worldviews or ideologies as truth, right? And the problem with this is that this creates all kinds of different fanaticisms, right? You get, you know, communist fanatics, anarchist fanatics, white supremacy fanatics, Republican fanatics, Democrat fanatics, socialist fanatics, progressive fanatics, right? You get all these fanatics from different ideologies. They all think they have the right answer. They all think they can solve corruption or crime or poverty or whatever the case may be. And what Augustine is arguing is that all these different philosophies, isms, right, that they're just ideas created by human beings who are flawed and limited and don't know everything. And therefore their ideologies, right, whatever the ism is always going to be limited. It's always going to be flawed. And it's always going to not only not solve problems, but probably create new ones, right? And that leads to the next square down, right? Notice, human political and moral ideologies begin to war against each other and they begin to enslave other people in order to build a utopia, in order to build some kind of um, a perfect society that's defined by human standards, right? You got your communist utopia, you got your capitalist utopia, you got your Republican utopia, your Democrat utopia, your anarchist utopia, even, and so again, right? So people come up with these ideas about how the world works. From there, they come up with ideas about what government should do or not do. From there, they begin to convince other people to follow them, and then they go fight against other people who disagree with them. And this is where we get war and genocide from, as well as the other things we've been talking about. This is all part of the products of the cities of men. People who think they have to fix the universe and fix each other, even if it means not only with a scalpel, but with a gun or an explosive. Right? Science and technology are a part of this world too. Right? Notice science and technology always promises solutions to the limitations of what it considers to be an imperfect physical universe that does not meet our expectations. Right? We want to live. We're not satisfied with 60 years. We want immortality. We're not satisfied with only some of us surviving from a disease. We create vaccines. We're not satisfied with, our people living on this planet. We want to spread to other planets, right? Um, we're not satisfied with, people being born blind. We're going to find ways to stick machines into their sockets so they can learn to see. Um, and so notice that according to Augustine, right, science and technology is again part of this human standard, right? Man measuring the universe and saying you're not good enough. I'm going to fix you. Right? One of the points he's making is in the next box down is basically the cities of men, despite whatever ism they are a part of, political, moral, economic, scientific, etc. Right? All the worldviews have one thing in common. They're based on scarcity and fear, right? They're based on seeing the universe as not having enough, nature not being good enough, right? And being afraid. These things, these are emotional things that affect the way you see reality itself, right? Examples of the cities of men: Ur, Rome, Athens, Washington, D.C., Moscow, Beijing, Kathmandu, right? You name it, right? The physical cities of the world are the cities of men. So then that leaves us with the city of God, right? What's the city of God like? Well, in the city of God, God is the measure of all things, right? God determines truth. God determines the good. God determines the beautiful. And this world, right, in this city of God, what's the mindset like? What does it mean to recognize that God is the measure of all things? Well, what it means is that you become non-ideological, right? If you are living in the city of God, if you're a follower of God, if you live in faith, then you can't be a communist, an anarchist, a Democrat, a Republican, a socialist, a progressive, right? You can't be any of those because you recognize that all of those are created by people and they're flawed and they're limited. And you recognize that only God knows the truth, right? And so you recognize that you must walk uncertainly, right? Since you don't have an ideology to like program how to behave or what you should be doing, you walk in uncertainty, but with faith, recognizing that God shall lead you in the right moments, right? Um, that's kind of what it looks like, right? So what does that mean in the next box? Well, that means that you're apolitical and you're not self-righteous. Um, so again, because you recognize that political systems are flawed, ethical systems are flawed. Human beings are the ones coming up with these, different theories: utilitarianism, deontology, etc. Um, and so, since these, so that means you can't go around thinking that you're self-righteous with your ethical systems and theories, judging other people because you recognize that you yourself are weak, you yourself are a sinner, you yourself make mistakes, and you're not political at all. You stay out of politics because you realize politics creates more problems. It never solves them, right? Um, as again, only God knows the good, right? And so, if you want to be good, you just do the best you can to follow the example of Christ. Christ did not join a political party. In fact, Christ was executed by political parties. Right? Moving on, what else does San Augustine tell us about the city of God? The city of God recognizes what's called the law of unforeseen consequences. Um, for humans can't see every possible consequence of any choice that they make, and so every time scientists create new technologies to solve problems, it brings about even more complex problems as a result of that technological solution, right? So what's the alternative? What do you do as a citizen of the city of God? You learn to become satisfied with what you're given, right? You learn to accept nature as it is. You learn to accept human lifespan as it is, right? If you get 76 years, you're grateful for it, and you accept it, and you enjoy every second of it you can, and you don't try to squeeze out more time out of it. If you are, uh, you know, hungry, you accept it without fear, and you know that one of two things are going to happen: either God will provide you with food, great, or God will not provide you with food, and if you die, death is not a bad thing, right? So, this is kind of like the point of view that Augustine wants people to foster. Um, Notice that the instead of being dominated by scarcity, right? Your perspective is not about scarcity; it's about plenitude. Instead of your perspective being about fear, it's about gratitude, right? Um, Sorry, trying to kind of fix these notes here a little bit. All right. So a world a worldview based on plenitude and gratitude instead of a world-based view based on uh, fear and scarcity, right? So what exactly? Where can we find the city of God? Like the actual location, right? Like cities of men included Washington, D.C. and Beijing and New York City and Houston, etc. Right? So where can we find the city of God? Obviously, one, heaven, and two, New Jerusalem, which doesn't exist yet, right? That's the city of heaven on earth that's described in the apocalypse at the end of history, right? Um, so again, the city of God isn't really like in a physical location here on earth, other than here, right? It's a mindset. Wherever true Christians walk, there lies the city of God. Um, so, in conclusion, with San Augustine, um, what he's trying to get us to recognize in the city of God is that the example that Jesus was giving us is an example of a person who tries to help the person in front of him, not find solutions for the world. Right? When people start trying to find solutions for nature, the world, the government, society, humanity itself, when you start trying to think of solutions for those big problems, you create ideology, you create a new ism, which leads to followers and conflicts with other people with other followers, which leads to exploitation, enslavement, war, genocide. All the things you said you were going to fix, you're actually participating in, right? And that's the point he's trying to make. Um, Hopefully, you got something from San Agustine's lecture. We'll be jumping from the 300s with St. Augustine forward about 800 years to the 1100s with Thomas Aquinas in the next lecture.